Hello, everyone. Last time we talked about traditional or conventional plot structure. This lecture is about what happens when we break that structure. So, non-traditional plot structures. What happens when we depart from the expectations that audiences may have? How can we create interesting, unique, and uniquely engaging plot structures? So last time, this should look familiar. We talked about this structure where we have the status quo, an inciting incident, rising action, plot points, climax, and a resolution. What are some ways that we might depart from this structure? One possibility would be to have a nonlinear plot, flashbacks or flash forwards. Tell the story out of chronological order. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Another possibility, maybe we don't have one protagonist. Maybe we have a play or film that has multiple intersecting stories, multiple protagonists. Maybe a play like that doesn't have one clear major dramatic question. Or we could be missing some other element of what we would typically expect in a play. Maybe the climax is not there, or there's something different about the resolution, or there's not one clear major dramatic question. I want to reiterate that non-traditional plots can be uniquely engaging. However, I think it's important if you do include a non-traditional element here to have some rationale as to why you are doing it, because it can also be a little bit jarring. And so have in mind, okay, what is the effect that I'm trying to create here? What is the emotional or other effect that I'm trying to have on the audience by doing something differently? Let's look at the example and talk a little bit more about having a non-linear plot, because I think this can be really interesting. One possibility, why would you tell a story out of order? One possibility is to create mystery. So, when you tell a story in order, people are wondering what's going to happen at the end, and you have that sense of anticipation. Is the protagonist going to achieve their goal? Are they going to fail, etc.? But what happens if you, for example, tell the ending first? Well, uh, there's kind of a double-edged sword there. If you tell the ending first, you're giving away the ending. So in that way, you are maybe lowering the level of suspense and tension in the story, because now we know what's going to happen. On the other hand, it can create a really intriguing sense of mystery. This is why some television shows begin with a flash forward. If you watched Breaking Bad, this was one of my favorite shows. They often did this. So this is from the very first episode, the pilot. They begin with this scene, and we have Walter White. He is out in the desert. He's holding a gun. He's missing his pants, and we wonder what is going on. And so that mystery rises for us. You know, how did he get to this point? And that's what we're watching to find out. So the major dramatic question of this episode is not necessarily what will happen, but how did it happen? How did we reach this point? In a play of mine that I mentioned before called Ageless, I opened with a flash forward of this kind. And this is a play about a society that people take a pill to not age. And my main character decides not to take that pill and to age naturally. So the first scene of the play, the first thing we see as the curtain rises is an older woman and a younger woman. And the older woman says to the younger woman, "Hello, mother," and then blackout. And then we leave the audience wondering, what's going on? How is this older woman calling the younger one mother? right? Something's off here, something's unusual. So mystery is created in the mind of the audience. Okay. So creating that mystery. Another possible reason that you might want to tell a story out of order is to enhance a tone or a theme. For example, there is a play called How I Learned to Drive by Paula Vogel. And this play is told kind of in various flashbacks that are out of order. And why I think it works so well is the play is about memory. Memory is an important theme. It has to do with the main character thinking back and kind of trying to process and make sense of a relationship that she had with her uncle that was inappropriate, that crossed the line into molestation. And so we get these scenes from that relationship, from her life, that are told out of order. And if you think about how memory works, that's how memory is, right? We don't remember things necessarily in chronological order. We remember one event, and that sparks a memory of something else, and we jump around in that way. And so I think in this case, the form of the play follows function. In other words, the nonlinear form follows the function of having the audience think about memory and feel like we are experiencing memory along with this character. If you ever saw the movie Memento, kind of a similar idea here. So this is a story that has to do with memory, and it's actually told in backwards order, which creates a really interesting effect. And that brings us to cost of living. As I've mentioned, this is a play that departs from traditional plot structure in a couple of different ways. First of all, it's told in a nonlinear fashion because we have a prologue. And the prologue actually takes place after the end of the story. So what it really is a flash forward. We see Eddie. We learn that Eddie's wife has died, and Eddie is in a bar. And what happens? He reveals gradually through this monologue that he has gotten some texts from his wife's phone number and doesn't know who's sending these texts. Part of him wants to believe it's somehow his wife, and so he's come to meet somebody at a bar who's been sending him these texts. Remember, the risk with beginning with a flash forward is that you give away at least some of the ending of a story. So we know after reading this prologue that Ani is going to die. However, what this accomplishes is, at least for me when I'm reading it, it makes me very intrigued. It makes me wonder, well, how does Ani die? What happens? It makes me wonder, how did somebody else end up with her phone number? What's going on? I learn a lot about Eddie and his situation through this prologue. And so it piques my interest enough that I want to keep reading. Also, we don't have a single story here, right? We have these two parallel stories. And because of that, we don't have a single protagonist. This is a story about two couples. And I don't know if I could identify which of the characters feels like the protagonist. I think there's more than one. There's also no single major dramatic question. There's a different major dramatic question for each of the couples, right? So will Jess and John end up together? Will their relationship work? Will Eddie and Ani end up rekindling their relationship? These are two separate major dramatic questions. And then also because of the structure, there's no single inciting incident and no single climax. if we were to try to plot this out, we would have to go couple by couple. So we could plot out Eddie and Ani's story. And maybe it would begin where Eddie is helping Ani get settled into her apartment. If I had to identify a climax of Eddie and Ani's story, it might be the scene where Ani slips in the bathtub and Eddie has to kind of come and save her. That feels like the scene of the highest conflict and stakes. And then if we were to plot out Jess and John's story, it moves in kind of a parallel fashion. So we might say the inciting incident is Jess meeting John and interviewing for this caretaker position. What's the climax of their story? For me, I think it's the moment when Jess feels embarrassed that she assumed John was romantically interested in her, and she leaves his apartment. And then we have these two separate climaxes, and then we have this falling action where the two stories converge, and we have Jess actually meeting Eddie, and them forming a bit of a friendship in the end. So this story does not follow traditional structure, but I still find it engaging, and hopefully you do as well. If you want to depart from traditional structure in your play or in your film, feel free to do that, but just be deliberate about it. So be aware of what is the effect that you are trying to create on your audience by maybe telling a story out of order or by having more than one protagonist, right? Do it in a very deliberate way where you are trying to have a specific effect. And I would say let the story lead. And what I mean by that is think first about what is the story that you want to tell. After you've come up with that, then think about what structure, whether traditional or non-traditional in some way, would lend itself best to you telling this story. Okay? And don't be afraid to experiment. Maybe write your story, write your scene in a traditional way, and then see what happens if you shake things up. See what effect that has. In our next lecture, we will be talking about dialogue, and I will see you then.